yards.
No, those are the more prestigious.
That's so I can get up and down. Do you want me to like go downstairs and like just say it?
We did already once.
Yeah.
Okay. I can start whenever everybody's ready. Oh, where's the, should we wait for Laura?
I think we may have people still trying to get through the line for coffee too, so
Was it crowded then?
decent, and there was only one thing that wasn't empty.
Oh, well, I guess that shows there was a good number of people.
Yeah.
Welcome. Thank you for attending our board forum. I'm Michelle McIntosh, and I serve as UUFR's board, president on our board of directors. And we're going to be reviewing a proposed amendment to our bylaws regarding membership powers. If you were unable to attend this forum in person, we will also conduct a Zoom forum this afternoon at 3:30 p.m. The Zoom link is available through Thursday's Chalice newsletter announcement, and it's on UUFR's website under Stay Up to Date, Blog Posts, Board Forums on Proposed Bylaws Amendment, and the full text of the amendment is also located there. Next slide. And next slide. And I'd like to introduce your board of directors. Sarah Ford-Noor serves as our president-elect and will be presenting the proposed bylaws amendment today. Laura Dupre serves as past president. Brian Crouch serves as treasurer. Tom Karcha serves as secretary and is teaching OWL right now, but may be joining us later. Jessica Godrow serves as director at large. Sandy Pierce serves as director at large and as chair of our strategic plan task force. And Reverend James Kubal Komodo serves as a non-voting member. Now I will turn the meeting over to Sarah Ford-Noor, UUFR board president-elect.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. You can go ahead and move to the next slide. Thanks, Kai. And move again, please. Okay, good. Before we get into the text of the amendment itself, I wanted to give some background and context of sort of how we got here and how the board has been thinking about this issue. And I wanted to give an entree into this by talking about the quote, little issue that got us here. Of course, it's not little at all, but it is little relative to the big issue that we're trying to fix with this bylaws amendment. And the little issue is the issue of the room names in Peace Hall. As you all know, we had a major renovation of Peace Hall, and in that process, of course, the room names, like everything else, came down. And then as they were going to go back up again, a question arose as to whether they should go back up, if they should be numbers instead of names, if they should be names, what should they be? And I'm going to skip over a lot of really interesting and dramatic details. But the point is that there was a dispute over what the names should be, and a larger dispute over who should make that decision. And that was really the crux of the issue, right? Who makes the choice, not just what the names should be, but is that a staff decision? Is that a board decision? Or is that a congregational decision? Because in fact, the original names were chosen by a congregational vote. And so that was, in fact, the larger issue that then we were confronted with, not just sort of the microcosmic issue of the names, but the larger issue, which of course affects other things, of how we make decisions as a community. And so I want to talk a little bit about the key principles that the board tried to consider as we realized we needed to sort this out, and then we'll go into the text of the amendment itself. So let's go to the next slide, Kai. Okay, so, we have bylaws, like, a country has a constitution, So the first thing that we did was look to our bylaws to see who should make this decision. And we were surprised to see that, so many decades into our history, we actually had a pretty significant gap in our bylaws, which is that the bylaws lay out some specific things that the congregation is, that only the congregation can decide. But then the bylaws were silent as to how other decisions should be made. And so it was kind of this unmapped territory when we get to a question like room names. Who decides that? We were in sort of a no man's territory there. And so we realized that we needed to make this bigger decision. And so these are some of the principles that we tried to follow. And the first one is that UUFR is a democracy. And many of you who are here know this, but for people who are newer, this isn't like a Catholic church where the ultimate authority goes up to the Pope, or like other church bodies where there's, authority that goes up through some kind of ecclesiastical structure. Although we're associated with the UUA, that's not where really decisions come down. Here at UUFR, the ultimate decision-making body is all of us together. We are a democracy, and so that was the first principle that we kept in mind. The second principle that we kept in mind is that as our congregation has become both bigger and as we've become organizationally more sophisticated, we've realized that, the 450 of us acting together can't make every decision by committee. And so we've moved more and more towards a structure of delegation where we as a community delegate authority either to the board or to our professional staff. And that has been successful in making us a more effective organizationally. Obviously we don't run the same way that we did when we were founded by a small group of people. And so the second principle is that we want to stick with that organizational structure of delegation. The third principle is that we wanted the bylaws to be clear so that we and future generations here at the church would have the benefit of clarity of knowing who does make decisions so that we can hopefully stave off some of the conflict that surrounded, for example, this particular decision. And then the fourth principle was that we wanted to maintain, and I called it catch-all up here, but we wanted the amendment to have enough flexibility that it could meet any situation. Because obviously sitting here today, we can't anticipate everything that will come up in the future. And so it obviously just wasn't possible to list every possible decision and decide who will make it, congregation, staff, or board. And so we needed sort of a catch-all principle to decide how things will get determined in the future without having to anticipate all of those things right now. So those are the principles we tried to follow. And so before we go into the text of the amendment itself, what I want to emphasize is that we tried to do what I think you would want your board to do, which is to tackle a complex issue forthrightly, to try to look at the big picture beyond just the immediate dispute, and to solving something, bigger than that. We tried to be both practical, but also to always remember what, the values are that animate our community as Unitarian Universalists. And then we also tried really hard to bring the temperature down and to preserve relationships and to practice the values of loving and respecting one another, because that's fundamentally what it's all about. So let's go now to the text of the amendment, which I hope you all have on paper as well as up here. Laura, will you just walk around for a second and make sure everyone has one who wants one out there? So you can see that there's a little preamble here, and I'm not going to skip it because language is important. And as a former lawyer, I particularly believe that. And so you can see it starts here with this reaffirmation of our democratic principles, that all powers of the fellowship belong to the membership. That's how this starts. And that the membership delegates power, that the power springs from the membership and then it's delegated out. And then you can see here how that second principle of delegation comes into so much play. That what we say here is that the fellowship, that the members are delegating all power except the things that are listed. Now, we could have done this the opposite way, and I want to make that really transparent. We could have said, the 450 of us hold on to the power to do everything by committee except for these enumerated things that we delegate to the minister and the board. But we don't really operate that way anymore as a large church. So we did this the opposite way. We said, basically, the board and the staff, we delegate to them the power to run things day to day. But we, as a congregational polity, hold on to these specific things that are so big and so fundamental that only the congregation should be able to decide them. And so then what we did next was an attempt to list those things that were so big and fundamental to our identity as a congregation that only the 450 of us, or however many, and it may grow, maybe 750, it may be 2,000, but that only the group of us together should do. And this was a careful balancing act. We wanted it to include everything that was fundamental, but we didn't want it to become so cumbersome that the church can't operate efficiently because we're constantly having to call, a general meeting and get everyone to vote on that with all of the inefficiencies that implies. In doing this, we talked to a number of people. We also consulted with a lawyer. Frankly, we were disappointed with how short her list was. She had some expertise with other churches, and we thought that she would come up with a list maybe of things that we hadn't thought of that were fundamental, but her list was shorter than the things that we came up with. That being said, we're open to putting more things on here as people come up with them. But we'll just go through these. Some of these, and they're grouped at the beginning, were things that were already in the bylaws. And those are, you can tell which ones those are because they have the section numbers on them. But they'd never in the bylaws before been listed all in one place. It was like if you wanted to know what voting powers the congregation had, you sort of had to hunt and peck through the bylaws. So we did the hunting and the pecking, and we pulled them all together here, and those are they're listed in order in the front. And then anything else, and it starts at, let's see. Yeah, thank you, Brian. Starting at about I or J, those are then the new ones that we generated that were not previously listed in the bylaws. And some people think that things that were not previously listed in the bylaws, the congregation didn't have an inherent right to vote on. There's sort of a dispute about, well, where did things stand? Where do things stand now before this amendment is passed? That could be, I'm sure, interestingly debated all day, but I think the more important thing is, what does the future look like with this amendment? And so I think it's more important to focus on what are the things that are listed here. But A through H is everything that we already had. And I want to emphasize that within A through H are both the power to call and remove the lead minister, who then, of course, has the power over to hire and fire the rest of the staff, and to call and remove board members. So again, that's where the democratic part, again, is emphasized. Day-to-day decision-making responsibility is delegated under this model, but it's delegated to people who the congregation has the right not just to put into power, but to remove from power. And so I want to emphasize that the congregation always retains that. If the staff or if this board starts to go in a direction, or any board at any time, goes in a direction that the congregation doesn't like, the remedy to that, of course, is to remove board members or remove a whole board. But then I, J, K, and so forth through P, and we can talk about any one of these, are things that we felt in our discussions with other people are really things that should only be decided by the congregation. And I want to call out, because it was the thing that sort of initiated this whole process, the naming or renaming of any room, building, or outdoor space. We just felt that naming is a very important process that reflects the values of the community and that people feel very strongly about. And it's a very, I'm trying to look for a different word than spiritual, but that's kind of the only thing. It's like a very intimate way that we bless a space, and that it's something that we all need to be involved in and feel part of. So that was a resolution that we came to. And I'm happy to say that we came to that as a consensus, even though that there had been a pretty significant dispute over who had authority over naming, that ultimately that there was a consensus that that authority should be with the congregation. So the purpose of this forum is to both familiarize people with this bylaw amendment and also to really welcome feedback and input. I don't think we're going to make changes on the spot because we have at least one more forum scheduled, and we're also accepting comments by email. But this is a draft, and we certainly are open to making tweaks. Yeah, and we have a mic that we can get around down to people in the audience. So, Laura, thanks for your help with that.
Hi, thank you. I admit to having not paid any attention to this whole process. However, just my first glance at this, I wondered about E, the renewal of contract of a short-term lead minister, and M, approval of any contract over 3 years in term. And I guess if M refers particularly to contracts other than employment contracts, that at first glance I wondered if that
is a contradiction.
Well, not a contradiction, but the particular kind of renewal of a short-term lead minister is in the articles, already in the current bylaws. But I guess I don't know. Just unpack that for me.
Karen, that's a really good question. Yeah, as you point out, E is already in the bylaws, and it's about a short-term lead minister. We intended M to be about non-employment contracts, and maybe that should be clarified. The kind of contracts we were thinking about were things like rental contracts, like when we rent the space in Peace Hall, like to a school during the week, or like a sales contract, like we recently purchased new HVAC units, something like that, or like if we have a contract with a company to like maintain the grass or something like that. So it's intended to be more like sales or rental contracts, but I see what you're saying, and I'm making a note. Maybe we need to specify that it's not employment contracts. It's a good point.
But then, is there any other place in here for any other kind of contractual staffing contracts? In other words, or I don't know. Maybe that is a non-issue because it doesn't happen. But in other words, if a staff person is hired, it's open-ended until such time as they resign or are dismissed.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So all that kind of staffing stuff just fall under our policies and procedures, falls under the authority of the lead minister. So it's not in the bylaws, but that's how it works under our policies.
Hello. First, I want to thank you all for what you've done. You've done a great job of improving, which was presented to you last spring. But on item M, you all say anything over expenditure over 35% of our annual budget is to be approved by the congregation, but you all will have the authority to spend up to 35%. Now, in this current budget, that's $233,000. There is absolutely no way in this world you should have the authority to spend that much of our money without our input, period. End of discussion. I've been on the board. I have approved expenditures, but nothing in this extreme. You should go down to at least to 20% is kind of acceptable. I believe it should be lower, but I understand big expenditures. I'm glad you mentioned the HVAC systems. That brings up another practice of the board that needs to be in your policies. You all accepted a bid literally without any competitive bidding. That is a bad business practice, and it should be in your board policy to always require competitive bids. End of discussion on that one. So that's what I feel about Article M. The second one is an omission. We have always, as a congregation, been asked by the UUA to vote on statements of conscience, to vote on who should be the next president of the UUA, and have occasionally been offered to vote on items like the 8th principle that's coming up right now. There is absolutely, that is a power of this congregation. It is not a power of the board to tell our representatives going to UUA how they should vote. Again, so that should be added in there. You do have the language. I've written it before. I strongly believe that should be part of this, and it should be up high, not just an addition. Now that's my 2 cents, $2, whatever y'all take, but I strongly believe in both positions.
Jim, I'd value your input more like 200 or something, or 2,000. I just want to compliment Jim because he has been right in here with us all along, like really offering a lot of input and helping us work out these tough issues. I wanted to say, let me take the easier one first, but no, I'm not sure which one that is. The UUA thing, we basically agree that probably something is needed here about the UUA, and we basically just got stuck figuring out what that exactly should be in the time that we had. It has always actually, I understand, been a little bit of a tricky issue in terms of directing delegates how to vote. And usually what has happened, I think, is that delegates have just gone and just kind of voted however they want, and there hasn't been really a process, or at least there's only been a very inconsistent process about whether they are actually representing the congregation and have directions to vote how to represent us, or whether they are kind of representing themselves and voting their own individual conscience. And that problem or that issue has been exacerbated by the fact that many times we're not really electing delegates. It's just someone volunteering to go like at the very last minute on their own dime. So we wanted to put in something kind of like a whole thing about the UUA and capture that. And then we just realized that really more thinking needed to be done about how to make that work. So I think the answer to that one is no disagreement. That needs a little bit more polishing, and then that needs to be added. In the meantime, I think that can be addressed by our really well-crafted catch-all, which I'd like to draw everyone's attention to in item O. this is how we kind of solved the problem that actually Jim was one of the people to bring to our attention, which is like we're never going to be able to anticipate every fundamental issue that probably deserves a congregational vote. And that's why we have O, which says basically anything can come, any motion can come before the whole congregation, but there's a little gate. There's just a beautiful little gate that I think is personally is just the right size. And that is that to get something on the agenda for the entire congregation to vote on, any member just comes to the board of directors and gets a majority vote to put it on the agenda. So it's a gate, but it's not a very narrow one. It does prevent things like someone who's pissed off coming and saying at a general meeting, I vote that we censure, Louis Kapolsky because I'm really mad at him. That would have, someone who wanted to do that would have to ask the board to put that on the agenda, and they'd have to get a majority vote of board members to put that on the agenda. So it feels to me like the right balance, but it's certainly a way that until we get this UUA thing kind of a little better researched and figured out, we can get it on. If we need to vote on a UUA thing, we can certainly get it on the agenda for congregational meetings. The budget thing, I think this is one where just reasonable people can disagree, and we're just going to have to come up with a number. I'll ask maybe a couple other people on the board to speak to this. We looked at some recent expenditures. We looked at, for example, and the HVAC system was a big one. We looked at, the board recently approved new HVAC system recommended by the environmental committee. The question was, would we have wanted to come to the whole congregation and have a full congregational meeting to approve that? And the answer we came up with was no. We think the process worked well, and we think that what the congregation wants at this level of size and sophistication is for a dedicated committee of experts like the environmental committee to make recommendation, and then for your elected board to approve it. Now, there's people who legitimately, reasonably disagree and think that a better way to choose an AC system is for a committee of 450 people to discuss and vote on it. And that's just kind of one where it's just like we have to agree to disagree and be a democracy and take a vote, which is what we're going to do at the congregational meeting. And if there's people who think it should be 20% and that's the majority, it'll end up being 20%. And if there's people who think, I think that you can't spend $50 without having a committee of 450 people get together and decide on it, it would be that. We're a democracy. We have to decide on this, question of efficiency versus group input, and it's just a matter of compromising on the number. So the board came up with 35%. Jim says 20%, it's like, we'll get there. We'll get there arm in arm. But let me invite anyone else who wants to speak to the specific number to do that.
I can speak generally to the specific number. So as I understand it from James, the recent kitchen renovations would have exceeded 20%. Is that accurate? That's accurate. And I'm an architect, and I looked into costs for a roof. If we needed to replace the roof, we won't need to replace this roof soon, but this roof or at Peace Hall, and that would be covered. It seemed like, the 35% would cover likely costs, and from our perspective, it didn't seem successful. But I also would like to just mention the way the HVAC decision was made. Jim's right. I mean, it is prudent to have multiple bids. The reason there were not multiple bids on this recent upgrade was we had worked previously with the same contractor, and they'd done a very good job on previous upfits, and so that's why they were hired, is a continuation of working with the same people that we trusted.
comments? Yeah, Chris.
I doubt I need a mic. I just, on the UUA issue, I just wanted to point out, and it's okay, there's nothing in our bylaws that says we're even Unitarian Universalists. We don't have to go to the UUA to hire a minister. There is nothing there. So, and I think that's a hole. The last committee did not address that because the woman asked us to. But it's kind of lurking there, and I mean, once we kick that sleeping dog, it may jump up and bite us. So we can just wait for a while to come on and look at that a little more closely. There is nothing on paper. We have an old charter that, as far as I know, I'm the only person that knows where it is. I have a photograph of it. So it's an old issue and it needs to be focused on, but it's probably not the time.
Yeah, that's a great point. One way we kind of tried to address that obliquely is in letter L, where we said that it is the congregation's right to decide if we affiliate or terminate our affiliation with any dues-paying membership organization. And that was our attempt to give the congregation power over both our affiliation with UUA and with One Wake. And with anything else really significant like that, to say it's not for the board, it's not for the lead minister, it's for this congregation to decide if we are with UUA, if we are with One Wake, or if one day we were to come out of those organizations, it would be only all of us together voting as a democracy to decide if we would be in or out. But yes, I mean, Chris, I agree with you. Other than that, it gets a little sticky and complicated, and maybe you should chair a committee. I don't know. All right, who else has a comment or question? Yeah, please. Do we have here, let me get James the microphone.
So Chris, actually, the issue you brought up is becoming a liver issue in our wider movement, especially for smaller congregations. With the ministerial shortage is very real. Some congregations have chosen ministers who are not in fellowship with the Unitarian Universalist Association. For example, there's and this is mostly smaller congregations. And many times it works out very well. For example, there's a smaller congregation just outside of Charlotte who is now being served by a quite liberal Methodist minister, and it's working out wonderfully for them. I don't think that's going to happen yet with a larger congregation, but it's something that I don't think it's the time to address it now, but it would be a good idea for some future board, some future task force to address. Yeah, it's not an irrelevant issue. It's a good thing to bring up. I'm glad you did.
Other questions, comments, or compliments about letter O? Any of those things are welcome. Yeah. Yes. Do you want the mic?
If we are affiliated with them, that we are then required to follow their rules.
The UUA actually has very, very few rules for congregations. In fact, if you read through all the UUA bylaws, to the best of my knowledge, the only way that a congregation can get kicked out of the UUA is by having a creedal test for membership. So, at least for now, a congregation can do almost anything else. I think if you pay 0 dues for a certain number of years, you can also be removed. So, to the best of my knowledge, those are the only 2 binding things for a congregation to participate in the UUA. Everything else is advisory, guidelines. There's a few rules with insurance programs. Like if a congregation can't decide simply to provide insurance with a minister without providing it to other staff members. But that's participation in a certain program. But basically, just, you know, no creedal test, and you have to pay something.
What about the selection of ministers? Because, you know, I thought there was a rule that said, for example, if the assistant minister applies to be the lead minister, we have to say no to them first. That's how we ended up with John, and then the whole, like, developmental is for this amount of time.
Those are all suggestions. Technically, there is nothing binding. Most of those suggestions come out of really hard-won experience. So it's usually a good idea to follow them unless you have a good reason not to. But there's nothing binding on this congregation to do that.
Yeah.
Except sometimes there are consequences, not for the congregation, then for the clergy. For clergy, yes. Their fellowship, you know. So anyway, you know, consequences of different sorts for different people. There are more rules that clergy have to follow than the congregation does.
I think we've established, and frankly, I think it's been helpful to establish that the UUA issue has, you know, some interesting permutations and bears some looking at. But anything else? I really appreciate everyone being here, and if there's any more comments or questions, definitely feel free to contact any of us as individuals or at the board email. Do we have the board email on a slide? Yeah. Yeah, and I'll, with that then, let me turn it over to you, Michelle, to close.
Yes, board@uufr.org. Emails can be sent there with any questions. Thank you, Sarah, so much for all of your work on this. And also, Sandy had some input on this, and also Jim heard us, gave us a lot of input, and it's really appreciated. Thank you all. And thank everyone for attending today. This proposed new membership powers section for our bylaws will be up for a congregational vote November 12th, when we will also be voting on our 5-year strategic plan moving forward together. Please plan to attend and urge others to attend. This meeting is adjourned.